Holly Ormrod-Stebbings is a concerned architect. She's concerned that 3 out of 100 of the biggest architects' firms are headed by women. She's concerned that approximately 2 of these 100 practices have management teams that are more than 50% female, and that men occupy 90% of the highest ranking jobs at these companies. Holly's passionate about promoting diversity in the industry, and she knows that the lack of women in top positions in the industry isn't indicative of current female interest. Holly knows that in 2016, UCAS revealed a female-male split of 49-51%, which was up from 2008, where it was 40-60%. Let's hear how Holly plans to become a role model for women entering the architectural field to make Lady Elizabeth Wilbraham proud. She was the UK's first female architect who mentored Sir Christopher Wren and infamously wasn't allowed on building sites, so had to send men with her plans. Welcome, Holly. Holly, you have the most, for anybody not watching this visually, just listening to it, you have the most incredible hair.
Thank you very much.
Is it real?
It is real, yes. Yeah, I mean, I spent most of my teenage years trying to suppress it, to make it straight, use archaic wands and things to straighten it, and then realised that you can't defy nature, and then so just go with it, and now it's thanking me for it, I think. So yeah, thank you.
It's absolutely incredible. It's about 2 feet long, isn't it?
Yeah, it's got very, very long. I live in Sheffield. I go to Birmingham to get my hair cut for
any
specific reasons, because there's a specialist curly hair salon that I go to in Birmingham, which is very, very good, and so I have to make a considered effort to go and get it cut. So it's been a while, but it's probably overdue a little cut, I think, but it's okay. It can take a bit of knocking, I think.
Gorgeous.
Thank you.
Now, tell me, one of the first things we start with on this podcast is a little bit of an icebreaker.
Okay,
So
yes.
something that you either show us or tell us about yourself that our listeners wouldn't particularly associate with you.
Yeah, I've actually got it around my neck, I think, as long as it's still there, which is my Thor's hammer here. So it's a funny thing, because actually most people who have met me within, I don't know, maybe not half an hour, not like the vegan thing where, if someone's a vegan within, 5 minutes of meeting them, it's probably a couple of days, but they'll know that I've got Viking ancestry. So up my dad's side of the family, we are a long, long way back, obviously, Vikings. So I'm a bit obsessed with Vikings and things. I don't do the whole kind of dressing up side of things. I haven't quite got to that stage of my life yet. You never know, it could happen. But this I picked up, I think, at the Viking Festival in York one year. And yeah, so we've got bona fide Viking DNA as well. So the surname is Viking. And I think we had a test done a few years ago, and it's sort of about 10% Swedish, Norwegian, something like that. So that's quite a lot for, a sort of standard British person walking
Isn't
around.
That fascinating. So, any sort of personality traits that a Viking...
Some temper. And my daughter has as well. I mean, she's almost kind of got the whole Viking thing kind of distilled down into like one. She's like sort of your shield maiden meets your berserker, which was the ones that went berserk. That's why they're called berserkers, or the other way around. They used to sort of like grab their shields and, go absolutely mental. So she's not quite on that scale. She behaved really well at school, but she's got that temperament, and I definitely have as well. So whereas my dad's really chilled out, so I think maybe it skipped a couple of generations. I don't know, but yeah, I think I'd be all right in a kind of a battle
on a boat
if we had to. If we came to it, I can row, things like that. It's good. Yeah.
Did it help you during COVID?
I don't know. We didn't sort of bury any like fish in the garden and putrefy or anything like that. So, yeah, I maybe.
So in a past life, you've descended from a Viking.
That's right.
And in this life, you're an architect.
Yeah. Not quite so exciting, but yeah,
it's
that's right.
A fabulous industry.
Yeah.
An incredible industry that UCAS are reporting 50% of the entrants are females, one of which you are.
Yeah. So actually, it's interesting because when I first started at university, which is quite a long time ago now, it feels like ages ago, you get kind of 50-50 female to male split, and you think this is fantastic. You know, if you hear about women architects, it's limited to a tiny handful of names that people actually recognise. Obviously, you know, most people could reel off a few names of male architects, but I think generally with women it sort of comes down to Zaha Hadid, and that's generally it. And so I thought, wow, this is really kind of paving the way for a new generation of women in architecture. But it really does kind of tail off the further you go through the course, because there's the degree, then you work for at least a year, and then you go back and do another degree, and then you work again, and then you do your final degree, effectively, which is the part 3. And at each stage, it gets less and less and less how many females are in the industry. And there was certainly times where I had massive wobbles where I thought, I can't do this anymore. Absolutely.
Why is that? Why are the females beginning the course and then not ending the course?
I don't really know, but I think a lot of it, there's a huge culture of presenteeism in the architecture departments of universities, where if you're the one that slept in the studio overnight, you're the one that has all the kudos, you know, and it's still very kind of...
So hard work counts.
Yeah, and not just hard work, it's kind of long work, you know, and I used to sort of set myself this thing of, right, I've got to do all my work in a working day, because when I work, I don't want to be there till...
That's smart.
At night. You know, like I've got this amount of time to do it. My brain kind of switches off at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon anyway. I'm quite a morning person, but 4 o'clock, it just turned into a vegetable, basically. So I just thought, right, now, this is when I've got to do my work. But there were particularly, not, I suppose, you know, men and women, but people there, they'd bought a laptop or a massive iMac in, you know, and they were just living in the studio.
And these were guys, predominantly male.
The one that did that was a male. And they're the ones that when the tutors get there in the morning, they see them, oh, wow, you slept, oh, you worked really hard, and things like that. And not to say women can't do that, but I think when I got to my second degree, you know, I had a mortgage by then and I had bills to pay. I'd got married by then as well. And you have responsibilities, and I had to have a job. So I couldn't just turn up, work for 18 hours straight and then have a sleep for 2 hours and go back out again. So I had to do things that earned money to pay for bills and things, as my husband did as well. But as you go further and further through it, obviously you're older, you know people who've finished their first degree, they're on decent salaries in decent jobs. And I think maybe for women, there's more of a sort of departure in that you kind of think, well, actually, if I'm going to have a family, you know, obviously the kind of classic, your biological clock is ticking, there is that kind of pressure in thinking, well, if I'm sort of 30 by the time I even start working as an architect, you know, I qualified when I was, I think, 28 or 29. I mean, I think the earliest you can qualify is about 25 if you squeeze it all in, but I took longer at each stage because I did things part-time and worked for extra years and things. And then that's the point at which your parents or your in-laws start sort of tapping their watches and saying, when are my grandchildren arriving? So I think there probably is that kind of gender sort of disparity still in the industry, and also women who then work in it. They're the ones who can't be there sort of till 10 o'clock at night when there's a deadline. You know, in a lot of practices, there's overtime that's not paid and things like that, that they have to go and pick their kids up from school. And I think there's still this kind of assumption that if it's either the mother or the father of a child who's going to go and pick a child up, it's going to be the mother. You know, there's going to be that sort of assumption. Thankfully, in our house, that's not the case. But I think in most households, it's, you know, the nursery rings, they've got a temperature, brilliant, okay, off we go. And so then there's that limit of potential for being promoted and things like that. So it's still a huge problem, I think, particularly in practices where there's that assumption that you're just going to be available all day, every day, because such and such wants their drawings finished or their planning application in and things like that. I've been really fortunate in where I've worked that there hasn't been that culture, and people I've worked for have had a much more kind of proactive approach to sort of flexible working and things, and I'm setting that now as the kind of tone in my own practice. But it's still out there hugely, and I think that probably when women have taken that first degree and then they're in their year out, and they see that maybe there's a lot of men at the top, a lot of women in less senior roles, and they're the ones who just can't sort of commit themselves so fully. It's a funny thing, even at degree level, even though you sort of think, I'm at university, I should be enjoying myself, it instantly becomes this thing where you have to live, breathe sleep architecture. And I didn't really. I like it. I'm interested in it, and I really love it now because of what I'm doing. But at the time, if it was a choice between, I didn't even want to go out partying necessarily. It was just like having another life, doing other things.
And that doesn't seem fair, that we're being judged not by the quality of our work, but the volume of hours that we're able to give to our work.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when I was at degree level, I had a job, part-time job, and I had a review or whatever it was, presentation, and I said, well, I can't stay past 5 o'clock in the afternoon because I have to go and work, because I had a 6 till 10 shift at a shopping centre. And they looked at me, the tutors looked at me like, you're not committed. Well,
because
I'm
you
sorry,
had a second
I have
job.
to go and work. Yeah, that's right. I mean, I had to earn money to live. And that was almost like you could feel the black mark going down against my name, things like that. So it's interesting because when I was at university, there's a huge range in what kind of people are interested in, what they offer. There's so much that's weighted towards studio work, which is your design work, and then there's another part of it which is essays, lectures, things like that, which are examined, in the traditional way you would anonymously. And I did really well in that sort of stuff. And then the design stuff, even though I consider myself to be a good designer, I didn't do as well because it was very much kind of like, it was a boys' club, really. It wasn't just boys in the boys' club, but it was very much a kind of members' society. And there's so much about the education system that I just don't think is right, really. I think it can be quite discriminatory because if there's people who can't be there all the time because they have to work or because maybe they're a mature student and they've got a family and they have to get home in the evening. It's fine if you're an 18-year-old who's got a massive wodge of cash in their pocket and they can do whatever they like. But if someone decided if they were 32 they were going to become an architect, I think it'd be so hard because you're just expected to be literally like living it all the time.
It's an interesting thing about the transparency of these rules that are expected but not spoken about. In television, there's, which is one of my careers, there's an unwritten rule and it's age.
Yeah, of course. We hear a lot about it, don't we, with women. Obviously Jeremy Paxman can still present University Challenge until one of his arms falls off, or whatever, even then probably. Yes. But you get to a certain age with women and it's like, oh, sorry.
Yes.
I can't have you presenting the news. You've got a wrinkle on your face.
Yes, and it's not public. It's not a public rule. And I wonder if, this rule about how many hours you're available in the architecture world, which is going to elevate you faster. I wonder if that rule was publicised, at a kind of, a formative time in the career, how many people that might put off, be it women or men. Yeah, I mean the thing is as well, there's certainly, it's one of these careers where there's not a huge incentive for the older generation to encourage the younger generation to get into it. I mean, obviously there is still a culture of support and nurturing and mentoring and things, but if you were a sort of big name seasoned architect, obviously you want a lot of oiks to come and work for you, but you don't want someone to come and take your throne. So I suppose maybe there's a little bit of fear of if there's a huge number of people coming out into the market of employment and they might start kind of bidding for jobs that you want and things. I don't know. It's a funny thing. There's still a lot of it that kind of rings of that very traditional kind of, it's a job for the men folk to do. And so let's put a pin in that and let's talk about the benefits. Obviously there's obvious benefits for men and for me there's obvious benefits for women being in this business as well. Let's talk about some of the obvious benefits of having females in this industry. Well, I shouldn't just talk about my own experience because I think women being in all different types of architecture is hugely important because 50% of the population is women. Even if you just go to something as simple as a theatre, that if a brand new theatre's been built and there still aren't enough toilets for women, you kind of think someone's been in that design process and realised, okay, well, this is what the building regs say, fine, we'll just stick in enough toilets. There's still a massive queue every interval because there's statistics about this. I've read books about this, like how much longer women take to go to the toilet, and they're not all just
faffing about. So things like that, I just think it takes a perspective. But in the work I do, I mean, I'm specialised in residential projects. I work in people's homes, so my own company, I've based from picking up projects and it's snowballing from recommendations, which has been wonderful. And you just get a glimpse of people's lives. I just kind of enter someone's house and then you talk to them and you start to understand how they live, and everyone lives differently, even though everybody thinks, I want a big extension at the back with some bifold doors or whatever. The way that is nuanced to kind of suit their particular situation. So sometimes you might have a family where they have a child who's autistic and they need to have bedroom accommodation on a particular floor that's near their parents and things like that, and a sort of standard approach that doesn't fit that. And the number of people I've had come back to me and say, we love the fact that you're a woman, things like that is, hopefully they love the fact that I am me as well and not just a woman. But I think they seem to think that helps, because I mean we've picked up a few projects that other architects have been involved in initially, and then we've kind of taken them on, and it sounds a bit cheesy, but the kind of USP, I suppose, of the business is the fact that we try as hard as we can to listen to people and how they live and understand. And I know what it's like to have a house that has got a tiny kitchen and you've got kids at various parts of the house, and one of them could easily be choking on a pea or something, and you can't see the child because they're in a different room. And I think just that kind of experience, it does help. And not all of our clients are families, but even then I think it's the kind of understanding and empathising and sort of being really kind of in the thick of family life. It's unfair to say that men don't get that. I'm sure there are lots of men out there, male architects out there who would have the same way of thinking.
Agreed.
But I do think it's almost like a bit of a branding type thing, that I think even if there's a man who could do it just as well, I think it helps in my situation that I'm sat down in someone's house and we're there chatting about family and kids and things like that. So I think it sort of just puts people at ease in some ways as well. And in most cases, I think people are happy with what we do as well. I'd like to think so. And we get good feedback on the designs that we produce and the fact that they're based on how people actually live, as opposed to just, here's your big rectangle stuck on the back of your house, enjoy that kind of thing.
It's an interesting distinction, because what I hear you talking about is the difference between marketing, which is identifying what the customer wants, and that's your starting point, versus selling, which means to me just giving them what you think is necessary according to maybe the building regs.
Yeah, exactly. And you could do it like that. I mean, lots of people, I think, particularly in the domestic industry, of architecture, think that architects are just for the super wealthy or for massive projects and things like that. And I think there has been a kind of almost a bit of a PR job in making people realise that they are relevant to everybody's lives. It's not just your Olympics or your hospitals or whatever that need architects' involvement. It is, I mean, the smallest projects we've had have been a porch, literally a porch, tiny little porch for an elderly gentleman who wants a downstairs loo in his house, but he doesn't want to carve out some of the rooms in his house. And you still have to think about that as carefully as you would a project where somebody wants to put a huge garden room wing on the back of the house with a sauna in it, or they're spending probably at least 10 times as much money, but every project kind of needs that level of care. So it's certainly the case that it's kind of making it seem relevant to everyone's lives is what we do, and anyone could come along and draw 3 or 4 walls on the back of someone's house and say, right, yeah, there you go, build it, great. And you see extensions where that's been done, and we come along and unpick it and knock half of it down and then do it differently, because I think a lot of it is kind of selling that service, that what we offer is not just someone drawing, it's coming and listening, understanding how do you live, how do you operate, what happens when you wake up or when your kids come in from school, or when you come back from a walk and your dog's covered in God knows what, fox poo or something, and then making people realise that maybe they need a dog shower or something like that. So it's sort of pushing them in a certain direction, but not too forcefully. And again, I mean, this is where we've had feedback about the kind of female element, is that it's not a case of, right, there's your design, this is going to be perfect for you. Whatever it's like, you have to fit into it. It's a collaborative process between us and our clients as well, which is why it's just universally relevant, really.
And just to be clear, some of the adjectives I hear you using: collaboration, good listening, caring, compassionate. These are not. For me, these are not the exclusive reserve of just, us, of women.
No,
there
absolutely.
are also men that embody these same qualities. But what I hear you saying is, for you, these qualities are what make an architectural practice such as yours, Astrid, stand out. Yeah. And this is what females can specifically contribute and add value to in this heavily male-dominated industry.
Yeah, absolutely. It's hard just to split down the gender line because people have different talents and capabilities and interests, so you can't necessarily say women are good at this and men are good at that. But I think if you have an industry where, for whatever reason, a lot of women are feeling excluded from it or feeling that they're just kind of squeezed out of it for multiple reasons, then you're missing out on all the talent that they have and all the creativity that they have. And they might jack in architecture and decide to become someone who makes bespoke belly button rings or something like that, and that they're still exercising that creativity, and there's nothing to say that that's a bad thing to do, but it just feels like if someone's been sort of squeezed out of the industry, then that's a talent or a creativity that could have been put into something like even something as boring as a massive warehouse, but that massive warehouse might have women working in it and they don't want to spend 20 minutes queuing up for the toilet every time they have a break or something like that. So I just think, it needs women because we all use buildings, we all use public space, and in different ways as well. You don't have to go around a town or a city with a pushchair to realise that I think probably a Victorian man designed it and didn't think about all those things, the women's things that no one's really interested in.
You are a female pioneer in this industry. What are you actually doing then? Because one thing that we sometimes may be referred to is moaning. So in the absence of us moaning, what are we doing to actually alleviate this problem?
Well, I mean, I've set up my own company. I think I got to the stage in my career where I was working for other people and had fantastic opportunities, but I think particularly post-children, I just sort of thought this is kind of my limit now because I don't want to work full time and juggle everything, things like that. So,
which is your right,
exactly, yeah. And it very much felt like this is where you've got to, and that's kind of what your level is. And so I thought, well, I don't want to work for other people anymore. Really, I don't want to sort of have to send CVs out and wait for a job that's got that perfect mix of part-time flexibility, home working, opportunities for just randomly taking a day off when your child's ill or something like that. And at the same time, thankfully, it was evolving kind of organically in my sort of developing projects and meeting people through social media and real life and things like that. And so when I kind of took the leap, it did feel like a big jump into the pool of risk and terror. Well, because I'd gone from a comfortable, secure job where you have a salary to a job where it was building and building and building. There's no guarantee that you're going to get the next project. I mean, literally every month I'd sit there and look at the kind of forecast and think, oh God, what happens if that one doesn't come through and that one doesn't come through? I mean, I've been doing it for about just almost to the day, actually, 4 years, set up my company 4 years ago.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And year on year, turnover has increased. And I think at the moment we've got about 80 live projects on the books. I did a count up around Christmas time because I sent some Christmas cards out. So those are kind of active projects. And there's 4 of us working there now. And I'm trying to, obviously when you run a business, it's difficult because the thing that you want to do is focus hugely on the well-being of your staff and their development and things like that. Obviously you still have to make a profit, so it'd be lovely if we could spend all day doing kind of team building exercises and things like that and having days out and looking at buildings, but at the same time it still has to work, otherwise no one's got a job. But I try and mix in things like I've done a bit of mentoring through universities, both local universities, trying to get a bit of involvement in the education system as well, and kind of almost like a bit of a little mutiny from the bottom up there. Not that I think that there's not a broken system, but I think there's a lot of things that they're still lacking in terms of employability skills, really. It's a very creative degree, but when they come out, they don't know anything really that you need for the actual job market. I mean, when I did my first degree, I think I finished and then I got a job, and then in the first day of that job I felt like I'd learnt more than I had in 3 years. I mean, I'd learnt lots of stuff, but none of it was very useful when someone comes along and says, right, can you phone the aluminium supplier about a guttering detail? And I was like, what is that? What is any of that? So that was a huge learning curve, and I think it's just a bit unfair to throw out all these very young people into the world and assume that they're suddenly going to be really useful to the world of work. And also it's hard for businesses to take that leap and take people on when you're just going to have someone who's very, very green and kind of doesn't really contribute something for quite a long time. So I'd like to change that a little bit if I can.
So if you had a magic wand and an unlimited source of supply of cash, how would you change the education system relating to architecture?
Well, I think it doesn't even necessarily need cash. I just think that there needs to be a lot more weighting towards useful skills in not just in kind of technology, but in design as well. So when I was at university, it was very focused on creating your own brief and inventing your own clients and just circumstances, things like that, which is really interesting. And obviously, a lot of people do go into kind of social facilitation and things like that. But it just felt like a lot of our time was spent doing the things that you will never really do as an architect. In most cases, you're not going to just turn up at a building site one day and say, this is going to be a rehabilitation centre for people who've done crime in their youth, and we're going to make an allotment there, which was basically every single project that we did when we were at university. So
it wanted some real humans with real problems.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it kind of what would be really interesting is if they took a real site, and said, we have to. But there's a developer here and he wants to make £5 million on this site. How are you going to do it? And it sounds like, oh God, capitalism, how dull. But I basically did that job for about 5 years, and we did projects based in London, and it was very much the number of units you fit onto here is completely dictated by how much they can sell them for and how much money they're going to make. And it sounds like you're just kind of lining the pockets of someone wealthy, which you are, but at the same time, the kind of interesting design challenges that creates. I mean, we did projects in existing buildings where you've just got to carve out that space in different ways and make it work, so you can have duplex apartments that go up, or big long ones, and they all have to have natural light because of planning restrictions, and also because you want to make habitable places for people to live. So that's a really interesting challenge, but it lacks any of that really in the education system. Based on my experience, it could vary a lot between universities. It's changed because it's been a while since I've been there, but I still think that when I see the kind of projects they're working on, it's still that centre for retired clowns that's on an old ice rink or something, and you think that's sweet. But
so you'd like more creative projects that are true to life.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because then when they've done that, and then someone applies to a practice like mine, and the margins are tight in terms of employing someone, because it sounds harsh and sort of kind of a bit business minded, but they have to be useful to us. I want people to develop and grow and nurture and feel nurtured, and I think hopefully the people who work for me do feel like that. But at the same time, we can't have a kind of a 6-month lead-in time before someone's actually doing work that is kind of earn some money. So I do think that projects, not just that, but interspersed with the ones which are more sort of creative and a bit more kind of out there, would help them as well. And actually, when I was there, I would have preferred to do that kind of thing, which is kind of your physical puzzle with elements of interesting design. It doesn't all have to just be kind of dull and ordinary, because people expect good design now. If you're going to buy a flat, you don't just want a box, you want something that's got something interesting. But yeah, it doesn't
Sounds like it needs to be updated.
I think
it's a little bit out of touch with the modern technology and the modern ergonomics that you're all working with now.
Yeah, I think so. And also I found that it turned into kind of a bit of a fine art degree towards certain points as well. So whoever's visualization was the swishiest and snazziest and looked the most amazing kind of was like the winner. And if you just turned it with sort of a load of really well resolved floor plans and some maybe elevations or some 3D sketches or something, it didn't hold as much weight, because they even admitted that they were seduced by imagery, which I know we all are, but there's different ways to present that. You know, it felt a bit kind of
and again,
fixed, really.
It's going back to these unwritten rules. You know, the rules by which the examiners marking your work, yet you don't know about it.
Yeah. It felt like someone knows what you're meant to do, but no one tells you, because there's a marking criteria. You can go through every single one of those and say, yeah, I've done that. And it turned out that rather than putting together a very full, well worked out portfolio of a building which would work really well in real life, you should have not bothered to do any of that, and you should have done a haiku and a dance. And if I turned up and done my haiku and a dance, everyone would have been, rolling over and clapping and having a complete and utter like in raptures about it. And like, well, hold on a minute, but what's the rule there? How did they work out that that's what they want? And it did
welcome to life.
Well, exactly. I know this is it. I mean, I think now it's interesting, because I always think if I went back now and did it again, I mean, not literally, if someone said £1 million, no way. I think maybe $1 billion I could, but not $1 million.
You've got 80 clients. Why would you need
exactly. If only. I just think I'd just sit there and be like, no, not going to take any of your nonsense. Some of the stuff that we were told to do, you have to present it in a white book that's a perfect square. Nah. I mean, even at the time, I just said, I'm not doing that. And it didn't go down very well, because I wasn't going to conform to
You're a bit of a rule breaker as well.
Yeah, I am.
And it's an interesting question. To be an architect, you need to embark on this 7-year process. So there's the whole question, education or self-education.
Yeah, I mean, again,
you can't be an architect without the 7-year education, technically. But then we had somebody, Robert Jemison, on the podcast a few weeks ago, who said, if you want to be an architect, just be an architect.
Oh, did he?
Mm.
Well, you wouldn't be able to call yourself an architect, because then the ARB would come after you. But anyone could come along and say, right, I'm going to start drawing buildings. As long as I don't use the word architect, that's fine. I think Thomas Heatherwick practices, he's not actually a qualified architect. I think technically Zaha Hadid wasn't an architect in this country, even though she's called an architect, because I think she qualified in a different country that you'd have to transfer. I don't know, maybe she got some special dispensation or something. I'm not sure.
She left a £67 million empire behind, didn't she, on her death? Successful lady.
That's right, she was. I mean, an incredible legacy. I don't necessarily know if she treated her staff that well. I remember seeing a documentary once where she'd called someone Potato because she couldn't bother to remember his name. So I sort of feel like if that's the benchmark of female architects, I'd like to sort of at least do a bit better in terms of the old kind of HR side of things. But yeah, it's a tough old slog. I mean, it's funny because other jobs where you've trained for 7 years, doctor or dentist or vet, you're on a pretty good starting salary. Whereas I think for a lot of people who come out of architecture, your first degree doesn't even really count. The kind of jobs that you're going into. I mean, there's huge movement against this at the moment, but there are jobs advertised on the RIBA's website that have been identified as paying below minimum wage or below the living wage, which is what they're meant to pay, because of the number of hours involved and the salaries. Even in places like in London, they're on pitiful salaries, really, considering their qualification level and how hard they've had to go to get there. And then you've got to do it all over again, and then you've got to do it all over again. So I do think there's a huge kind of need for it to change. And I mean, in Sheffield, both universities now are offering different routes to qualification, which is really good, because you don't just have to do the degree and then the degree again, and then the part 3 you can do it sort of on the job, which is, I think, fantastic, because then students are learning those actual practical skills
and you're able to hit the ground running.
Yeah, and I did my part 2 part-time. It was just in the kind of midst of all the economic crisis, so I actually worked as a sushi chef to earn my living rather than in architecture for most of that time, but that was fun. That was some good skills. It's basically architecture but with rice and vegetables. So yeah, the other routes I think are important.
So we're clear that you're very passionate about female inclusion and the diversity of all the genders within the architectural industry. So what are you actively involved in?
Well, I'm part of a group called Siren Sister, which was set up by Laura Jane Clark off of the telly.
Lovely.
So from Your Home Made Perfect and others. And
we've interviewed her on the Designer Arty podcast.
Have you? Yeah. So she's brilliant. I mean, she's a huge inspiration to me.
How so?
Well, because I think she embodies everything that I would kind of aspire to be, I suppose, as a woman in architecture. I mean, she's got a young family. She's very practical. You know, she does things. I think to really understand how things are put together, you kind of have to at least either have a go yourself or see someone doing it in reality. We're having a big renovation extension job done at our house at the moment, and there's things I've learnt that I didn't know. You know, even though I draw things on a daily basis, you look at it in reality and think, oh, because you're living it. Oh gosh. Well, I mean, even things, I mean, I've seen this loads of times. It's not so much just from our house, but if you draw a piece of plasterboard and then a wall, and so you sort of think, right, the plasterboard gets stuck onto a wall, you draw kind of a gap in the middle with these sort of blobs, and that's the dabs, basically. And then you see them in real life, and it is literally just someone's gone whack against the wall with a massive slug of plaster. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at that in section and I was thinking, that is just like I draw it, but when I draw it, it's like a perfect sort of lozenge. You sort of think, should I draw it as like a smeared kind of blob? Yeah. But just little things like that. And I think you see it on building sites. Obviously, when I go on site, I see things and I kind of try and soak it all up, because you never stop learning. You know, every little detail you kind of learn by doing it or trying it out and seeing it in reality. But the kind of the sort of the reality of it is how you learn. So I think by doing things like that, you know, she's sort of always on the tools, and also her media presence. I mean, I wrote my master's dissertation. I did an additional degree just for laughs, really, after I'd finished my
7 years.
3. Yeah, so I did my 9 years, qualified as an architect. And then I don't know why, I just felt like it was just a good idea just to add on an extra master's. I was pregnant at the time.
How old are you, 96?
Yeah, good, aren't I?
Fabulous.
So yeah, I was pregnant with my daughter, so I was just, you know, spent all day just trying to stop myself from being sick. And I was writing my master's dissertation on representations of architects in the media. And at the time, I mean, my daughter's only 6, so this is 7 years ago. It was basically, you turn the TV on, there's a programme about architecture, it's got a middle-aged white man presenting it, or who's the architect, and that's it, really. I mean, there were sort of snippets. I remember an episode of Grand Designs where they had a woman architect, and she drives a motorbike. Look, she's such a rebel. She's got a leather jacket, and it kind of felt like you had to have such a, you know, not that that's extreme, but
extreme
such a kind of
representation.
Something so novel to almost justify being on it, because either they don't show them at all, because it doesn't tell a very good story if you've got a really competent architect designing your building and it turns out really well. It tells a much better story if you've sacked your architect, you're doing it all yourself, you run £600,000 over budget, and then it turns out beautifully in the end. So there's a real kind of lack. I mean, I think people like George Clark have done a brilliant job of representing someone who's passionate, and, you know, he's from the northeast, so he's not just kind of your sort of standard home counties bloke, I suppose. But even then, he's still a man, you know, and you'd see the same sort of figure time and time again on every single programme about property, architecture, design, anything like that.
And you are breaking the mould.
And yeah, and I think Laura's changing that. You know, she's shown how the impact of having women designers. I know obviously she went up against Robert Jameson on Your Home Made Perfect for the first couple of series, and it was interesting to see how their different takes on things, where they were coming at from with their designs. So yeah, she's fab, and I know her now through the virtual world, and she set up this collective of female designers that we're all a part of, and it's just wonderful. It's just such a supportive. I mean, we've basically got a WhatsApp group, and we just message each other kind of constantly about different things, because some of us are architects, some of us are interior designers, there's landscape architects, there's all sorts of people in there who have got loads of different skills, and no one's ribbing each other, no one's
healthy competition.
Yeah, that's it. It's
supportive, collaborative.
Yeah, it is very, very supportive.
A trusting environment. And that's a great takeout for anybody that's looking to get involved in this industry, to find mentors, to find people that you trust who've maybe trodden the path already. Yeah,
that's it. I think it shouldn't take that, because I think a lot of people... you have to kind of pave the way, and I feel like in some ways I have, because I didn't know any female architects before I went into university. When I was practicing, I mean, even when I worked my first job in architecture, it was me and 16 men in an office, and it was that was in our department of the office. In the wider office, there was probably about 150 men and maybe about 5 women in different sort of departments, but within the architects there was another architectural assistant, so there were 2 of us women, but in terms of actual people qualifying as an architect, I was the only one. So there was a kind of novelty factor there. Some of the management used to just like to pretend I was the secretary sometimes, and I was the one that made the tea for the meetings and things like that, or had to answer the phone, because that's how things work.
I mean, unacceptable, but a complete reflection of their limitations.
Exactly, yeah. But I think they soon realised that actually some of the skills I had in sort of diplomacy and things like that.
Best revenge.
Yeah. When you've got a client who's got high expectations, and then an architect who's maybe got a very strong design vision, and there's a bit of a clash about, well, how much is that going to cost, or how easy is that going to be to deliver, and how quickly can you revise the designs, then they kind of bring in the sort of, the diplomat, which was me, to sort of ease the tensions and things like that. So I found my way in that, and I think that probably paved the way for me to realise that actually I want to be really involved in end users, the people using the buildings who are actually going to benefit, rather than sort of three or 4 steps removed. So yeah, that was an interesting experience. First job.
What a wonderful reminder that women, men, whatever your gender, we're all valuable, and we're all equally valuable, irrespective of somebody's unwritten rules. We will find out those rules, and they will be revealed. What is exciting within the architectural field for you, for Holly? And Astrid, what's exciting?
I think just seeing how people's lives change, and working with that, and thinking about how you can kind of work with a building. I love old buildings, so if someone said, I've got this house, I'm going to knock it down and build something, that looks like a football house, it's difficult because you can't tell people what to do, but I like to sort of, and I think because I've got more experience now and kind of, a bit more age, a few more years behind me, that I feel like I have slightly more authority, and you can kind of sort of suggest to people that it might be a different direction to go in. It's much more sustainable to keep an old building going if you can. There's features you can work with. When you go around a house and you see things like original door chimes, or an old fireplace, or parquet floor, or something like that, you kind of get a sense of how much you think someone's going to want to keep that, and it might be an easy win, or it might be the case that you sort of suggest to someone that, that's actually really on trend now. Just look on Instagram, you'll see that they're really, it's really trendy. So you kind of just have to use this armory of skills to sort of not force people into a particular route, because I just don't think that's the right way to do it. But I think if your focus is things like sustainability and honesty about what you're doing, honesty about the built structure that you're working with, and things like that, there's more at stake than just what somebody wants now. They might want a massive extension, but you kind of think, is that the right thing to do for the house? Is that the right thing to do for your life in terms of sustainability? If you're pouring this much concrete in the ground, could we pour less concrete in the ground and still have a really good impact? People's budgets as well. Obviously, everything's got really expensive in the last sort of year or so. So there's so many different factors kind of at play, and that just really like excites me. You know, it's a very sort of humble sort of aspiration, I suppose, in some ways, but also kind of just selling people the idea of architecture. Like everybody should have architecture in their lives. It's not just for people. It's not for the Russian billionaires, although probably not so much at the moment. It's
Gabby created Gabrielle Omar, a friend of yours who's part of your sisterhood group.
Yeah,
she created Tea with Architects.
Yes, yeah. So things like that, and it just makes people realise that they might be going around one of these exhibitions or something, and they thought they were just there to look at different windows or doors or flooring, and there's an architect there, and they think, actually, I don't just need to get the builder just to kind of make it up as he's going along. I could get someone who really invests in understanding how I live and giving me the best solution, which is the efficient solution. It's not the 6 metre long extension. It's the one that you might even use what you've got in your house. You might even knock some rooms down. You might knock a conservatory down. You've actually got less space, but it works so much better. So that's kind of what we do. So that I think it's so much about promoting what we can offer people. You know, if someone's spending £100,000 on an extension or a house renovation project, a few £1,000s to an architect is a really good investment. It's a bit of extra money, but I think it's always the case that it's going to be worth it. I'm quite passionate about that, really, because I think it's still an industry that's kind of slightly undersold, misjudged, I suppose, in terms of what we do, and we don't all just do shards and things like that. So it's kind of making it accessible to everyone, really.
So Holly, keep thinking outside the box, forget the box, create your own rules, and flying the Viking flag for female warriors such as yourself. Thank you for today. Really enjoyed the chat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Now, if you have enjoyed today's chat, please do like and subscribe. It means the world. And we'll be here in the Designerati podcast studio every Monday with fresh new guests with more disrupting design challenges. See you then.